Hey, what's up, everyone? So, this is going to be the eighth episode of season three, which is the advanced class and the overall 28th episode. So, pretty much, we're going to do like a quick regroup and recap over here about ways to improve your game. So, when you want to improve in Othello, you typically, I would say, I largely classify four different ways of improving. So, the first one is just literally just to open up your app or play with somebody and you observe certain patterns on your own. You based on pattern recognition, you basically try to avoid things that make it difficult for yourself to play, and you learn what's a good sequence on your own just by playing and observing. So pretty much learning from experience. Now, the second method is about textbook techniques, which is pretty much what you can gather from all my earlier lessons from season one to season two, and even some of season three. So these are pretty much textbook techniques, such as very technical ones that we've identified, like the stoner trap, wedge, sacrificing the corner, or playing 3 out of 4 in a corner. All of these are just pretty much textbook techniques and standard ways on how to how to handle certain situations in any given Othello game. So the third technique is to kind of learn some of the openings by heart. You use software review. You can learn the best moves based on what the software is recommending for you. So some of these softwares that we covered on is WZebra on your PC, N-Test, Reversatile, mobile apps like SEO. So that is pretty much the software review kind of technique. So the fourth way of improving, which is kind of like adopting your own style as you slowly become from a beginner to an intermediate to an advanced player, as you try to move towards being an expert player. I would say that it's very important to kind of cultivate and develop your own set of strength and openings, or certain plays that you're very comfortable with. That would keep it very efficient, especially when you're going into a very strenuous World Othello Championship like tournament, which involves many rounds and many intensive rounds at that. You probably wouldn't want to go into every single game having to think through every single move and put in 100%. Trust me, I've done that and it's extremely tiring to do so. So if you really want to keep it efficient and you really want to, perform very well, learn from the experts. So when I say learn from the experts, it pretty much means that we should observe how experts play, what kind of openings they use, and it's on the flip side is also about pretty much preparing against these players. So three of the players that I'm going to start to observe and kind of break down and analyze their game in the next three episodes as we close out season three for this year is basically Hideshi Tamenori in this episode, and the next one I'm going to be talking about, the American double world champion, Mr. Ben Seeley, and the final episode we'll be talking about the five-time world champion, Mr. Takanashi Yusuke. So in today's episode, we're talking about arguably one of the best players who ever played this game, who is Mr. Hideshi Tamenori. He has the highest number of world titles to his name, so a total of 7. So the last one coming in the year 2006, I think he's pretty much not been as active as before on the board games, but in the mobile app, he's pretty much still very active under the name of Tommy2016 in the Othello Quest mobile app. So, which is why you also see that the thumbnail in this episode is actually named after his nickname, Tommy2016. So, we're gonna use pretty much two ways to kind of learn from Mr. Hideshi Tamenori himself. We are going to go into the World Othello Federation website for his archived games back in the day, maybe when he was more active on the board sometime between the 90s and the early 2000s. So let's take a look at those games in that website, and then followed by analyzing his more recent games and his more recent style on Othello Quest app. You would realize that either way he has been very consistent and very efficient in terms of how he plays the game. And I understand from other people that he basically uses a lot of his, mathematical background, and I understand he has a finance background as well. So he pretty much likes to optimize and use his calculating abilities to actually try to work through the game. So I think that is also evident in his game and his style. So let's, take a look at his games, and then after that, we will be having a quick interview with Mr. Ben Seeley to kind of talk about Mr. Hideshi Tamenori, considering that Mr. Ben Seeley have played him on several occasions during those years. So yeah, let's move on to looking at his games now. Now this is the World Othello Federation homepage, which you can find from the worldothello.org essentially. So if we wanted to jump into the archives of the World Othello Championship, which we're about to do right now, you have to go to the home landing page, and then you can see that there are some news over here. We'll head on to the tournaments section. Let's click on tournaments, and we'll go in there. So over here you have a few options that you can choose, and of course we're going into the World Othello Championship section. So let's go there. And over here you can find some basic information of the World Othello Championship, some basic background and history, and of course we're gonna dig into the WOC history over here. So this is a very useful website where you can see WOC history. So the last World Othello Championship happened in the year 2019. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, 2020 and 2021 has not been played. So if you can see over here, you basically have a history of many, many years of the World Othello Championship. And of course, today we'll be looking at the year 2006, which was the last year that Mr. Hideshi Tamenori was actually actively playing, and was the last year that he actually won a World Othello Championship. So over here, if you look at the default page, you can click through the rounds. So over here, there is some information. World Othello Championship 2006. It was held in Mito City, Japan, which is basically the origin of Othello, that city. And basically, the default page is on the playoff and third day page. So you can see the standings after round 13. You can see Mr. Makoto Suikuni from Singapore. Even though he's a native Japanese, he represented Singapore back then in 2006 because he came over to Singapore under a work attachment program or a work overseas posting. So Mr. Hideshi Tamenori was tied in first place after 13 rounds of preliminaries with 12 wins each. And of course, Mr. Makoto Suikuni just edged him out by Brightwell. But that's fine because essentially at the end of round 13, you want to just be able to be within the top four in order to compete within the semifinals. So over here you can see the entire long list of standings, and you can also see the third day matches, which basically means the semifinals and also the women's final back then. So yeah, this is essentially the World Othello Championship website, and you can see that the final standings was actually Mr. Hideshi Tamenori winning the world title back then. So interestingly, you can see that USA was very, very close to beating Japan over there. And of course, we all know, based on the history, Japan has been winning the team championships for the past 15 or 16 years. So let's kind of quickly jump into the cross tables, which essentially will bring us to the games that we wanted to observe of Mr. Hideshi Tamenori, and how we are going to actually kind of learn his style and see whether that makes sense to us in terms of the kind of openings that he plays, and whether we would want to actually emulate that. So what we're going to do now is to just look through the games, just click through. Perhaps let's take a look at the first game that Mr. Hideshi Tamenori actually played against Caroline Otzel. Okay, so Caroline is playing a Rose Branch opening, and Mr. Hideshi Tamenori is essentially playing the standard Rose counter. So over here he plays the D7 move, which is the most standard book counter, which is fairly expected and also common back in the days. So there is no variation over here. One slight variation by Miss Caroline was to actually try to branch out over here as an early variation, which is a very good tactic in terms of how she wants to perform a variation. And surprisingly, she did play this move to c7 and give up e1 for Mr. Hideshi Tamenori to actually jump in to centralize. But even though Mr. Hideshi Tamenori managed to jump in and form a shape, I think Miss Caroline still did a fairly good job in terms of trying to nestle her discs in between over here to this region. So I think it's overall a very strong effort by Miss Caroline, even though she eventually did lose the game, but it was a very, very outstanding game by her. So over here, just playing natural parity, and you can see that basically both players have played their discs very nestled and very compact, so there isn't any loss in tempo per se by either players. It's just a pretty much very clean game that resulted. So the only thing that was special in this game was that Black jumped in. Over here, either way, White would be able to, White would have to give up a swindle, but given that all of the choices lead to a swindle, White chose the one that swept the disc and try to go for like an overpowering victory over here with Black capturing the last two moves but having insufficient number of discs. So let's look at the next game. So from that game, we kind of learned that Mr. Hideshi Tamenori plays the standard counter rose variation against a rose opening. So just having that knowledge, we can start to establish some patterns if we can see. So if we can see fixed patterns, we can prepare against a certain opponent. So that's pretty much how you would review and try to learn from an expert. So over here, Mr. Hideshi Tamenori is playing Black. This particular variation of G4 is a -4 or 6 opening, I guess. Playing this against a Commoth, I think even nowadays, Mr. Hideshi Tamenori does play this opening. So back then, since 2006, he was already playing this particular variation. So I would say that he's very well versed in this opening, and you can catch him playing online on Othello Quest, pretty much using this opening as well against Commoth players sometimes. So let's see. Yeah. So basically, he plays to the edge, defense, and then you can see if you just click through quickly, the way he's playing his moves is very clean. Over here is a special one, playing a quiet move leading up to the corner. He has a secured corner access, but he tries to, go in a very phased approach towards this corner 6 squares. So he pretty much takes a quiet move with the guaranteed access to the corner. Is perfectly fine for him to secure access over here to the top corner. So the interesting thing is once he captures this, he's able to force his opponent to give up corners and essentially wrap up the game pretty easily. So this one was quite a straightforward game for him. Let's go on to the third game against Borassi. So incidentally, Michel Borassi from Italy, he got 6 wins in this World Othello Championship in 2006. But surprisingly, after that, he improved tremendously to capture the World Champion title in 2008. So you can feel like Mr. Borassi actually improved very quickly. So over here, Borassi played Stephenson, and you can see that Mr. Hideshi Tamenori plays the no-kung opening against the Stephenson. So this is kind of fairly observed even in this game today, and also against all the non-Japanese players that he played within this tournament. So the only one that he played a Commoth variation was against was actually against Mr. Makoto Sukuni. So that's kind of interesting to note that only against a Japanese player he plays the Commoth, but against all the non-Japanese he actually feels confident enough to play the no-kung. So this particular opening that Borassi is playing is actually a very edge-dominant opening. So yeah, Mr. Tamenori is basically trying to branch out to the center as much as possible. So you can see this exchange in sequence is basically just changing tempo and keeping to the center of the board as much as possible. So yeah, basically I think this was a fairly easy parity game for Mr. Hideshi Tamenori. So you can see that after he's kind of wedged here, and Borassi takes the wedge and goes for the corner. Essentially, that is the odd region zone to the top left, and Mr. Hideshi Tamenori basically just seals it with normal parity. So let's go to the game against Feldborg. Pick up a few things. So over here is against a diagonal opening. So basically, Mr. Tamenori plays the Buffalo opening, which hasn't really changed. He still plays the Buffalo opening online these days. So it's very interesting to note that he hasn't changed his style for more than 15 years. So basically, he probably knows the opening so well, and he's so comfortable with it in terms of playing it, and he's fine in terms of the style that provides this. You can see that the overall opening seems to allow him to nestle his discs right into the middle, so it's very easy to find good moves for him. So it's very interesting. So this early X square is probably something that most people wouldn't really catch, but it seems like he's convinced that White does not have access to the A8 corner, and therefore he can play a move like that and to kind of just put the pressure on White in terms of finding access to the corner. So that was a bit of an exchange in the corner access. Over here, it is a tough one. Mr. Tamenori just probably counted the sequence, just playing force moves over here, just to seal off access, and he probably didn't expect the game to be such a close margin, but he still did very well in the end game to try to seal off the win. So let's take a quick look. Maybe we'll just skip through. Let's take a look at this game first against Mr. Makoto Sukuni. We'll just pretty much click through the opening. So over here, it's an interesting one that Mr. Tamenori played the Komoth F3 instead of the Nokon G5, which he used, to tackle most non-Japanese players. And over here, Mr. Makoto played the Logistello opening to kind of probably outwork his way around Mr. Tamenori's game. And over here, I think this style basically allows Black to nestle the disc in between in order to target the excess. So that's probably what kind of put Mr. Tamenori a little off guard over here in terms of the moves. So one smart play over here by Mr. Makoto was to give up the corner and then play this sequence whereby he gives up this entire diagonal thereafter, and he's able to secure a swindle. So he kind of caused Mr. Tamenori to self-swindle in that point, and in the end, Mr. Tamenori is forced to get the corner and allow the wedge, and finally, this region or this square on H7 essentially became a forced parity maneuver for Black. So over here, it's an interesting one. So let's move on to the next game. Okay, so now after we've looked through Mr. Tamenori's World Othello Championship 2006 games, so basically we can establish a basic profile for his set of openings. So essentially for Black, against Perpendicular, he plays Black Stephenson and goes into a number of variations there. And against Diagonal, he plays the Black Buffalo opening, essentially, and as White, he largely plays Perpendicular. I almost never saw him play the diagonal opening, with the exception of the World Championship 2006 finals, which was basically against Makoto. The final game he played the diagonal opening. Probably he wanted to create some sense of surprise for Mr. Makoto, since that was a very tough and crucial game. Basically the championship deciding game. And of course, as White, using Perpendicular, he largely plays No Kung against non-Japanese players, and against Tiger, he plays the Rose Bill, which is surprising because the Tamenori opening was named after him. Perhaps he changed his opening set. So we're going to go into the Othello Quest app. Pretty much, you can find basically Tommy is number 2 in the 1 minute game. You can click into his profile. We can click into his games, his recent games. He's on the plus 19 streak. Let's check through his games. So let's pick through a few games just to click through. We're just going to view this game and see how he played the opening. So he's playing as White over here. So again, you can see he plays the Perpendicular opening, goes into the standard rows. He plays the No Kung. And essentially when faced with this, he plays this same opening. This was very similar to the game that we saw against Borasi, actually. So you can see that his opening set is fixed, which is fairly interesting given that that was a game in 2006, and this is a game in 2019. He hasn't changed his style. He thinks that that's the most consistent way of playing it, and he therefore continues to play it this way. So take a look at this move. It's quite interesting that he plays a loud move over here, giving up a quiet move to his opponent to basically f7 here. So essentially he gives up this, but he gains 2 tempo by playing 2 consecutive moves over here perhaps. Yeah, so that's essentially his goal. So it's a fairly interesting approach in terms of how he chose that move. Because if I were playing, maybe I might choose to play this, force e1 and then play out this move over here, but instead he chooses to kind of reserve this pair and utilize the moves over here. So one interesting thing is he wasn't really afraid of black playing here because he would continue this with perhaps a6. So that's something interesting to note. So essentially that's how he played this. Okay, let's take a look at another game. He played against Cheese Chan. Cheese Chan is also a very strong Japanese player. So again, he's white over here. He plays the no kung variation, and against the standard book insertion to the center, he plays this kind of branch out line variation as white, and he jumps into the center. So this is something that can often be seen in his game. He likes to play this particular variation. So interestingly is that he doesn't respond to this. He doesn't play this because there is a cutback for black, and he doesn't block this, and instead he skirts around and just kind of ignores that approach and allow black to jump into the center, and then he just regroups over here, which is a bit of an odd shape, but yet seems to be effective because he finally won the game. Essentially, he just regrouped to the side and just ignore all approaches to the side. So over here, when black plays this, he just goes for the tail end move over here at f8. And essentially makes his way to the diagonal control, feeds off. Over here, black is feeding the swindle, hoping that he'll take it. He didn't take it. He jumps off to this move, forces parity. And finally, he corners his opponent with parity, I guess, and wins the game. So very interesting. So if you were to click through Mr. Tamenori's games in Othello Quest, you would then be able to get a very good idea in terms of what kind of openings he plays, and essentially the profile over here that we've kind of gathered is essentially what he plays online pretty much as well. So yeah, once you've established yourself to be an advanced and expert player, what you would want to do is to kind of establish a set of openings like that as black or white and keep it consistent as much as possible so that you can achieve the greatest efficiency. So that's essentially Mr. Tamenori's profile. And let's head on quickly to the interview. So, hello, Mr. Seeley. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to this interview. So, today's episode is basically going to be about the 7-time world champion, Mr. Hideshi Tamenori. And I think, given that you've played him quite a few times over the earlier part of 2000s, so, the year 2005, I mean, even throughout your world championship and I think in 2006 as well. So I think you would be one of the best persons to kind of uh, be interviewed about Mr. Hideshi Tamenori himself. So thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Thanks for having me. He's someone worth talking about.
Yeah. So ta- Mr. Hideshi Tamenori, he's a 7-time world champion and is widely known as one of the toughest players in the Othello world. In your view, what does Tamenori mean to you in the Othello world?
Well, of course, he's a legend. And he won Othello championships over such a long period of time, and he won so many. Um, I mean, I'm definitely proud of the fact that the only World Othello Championship I think that he attended but did not win was in 2004, which I won. I'm proud of that.
Mhm.
And I know that I motivated him greatly. He was very motivated to beat me. Um, and that was a part of why he made such a great resurgence in 2005 and 2006.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and that was very, very fun playing with him. He also had, I think, nearly the ideal tournament style. So when I was studying human players and trying to get in their heads and understand them, he had so many fantastic games, and his style of play was maybe a little more easy to emulate than Makoto Suekinen's style because Tamanori was more consistent, um, and that was helpful. It's a very solid style. It's a very like if you can kind of stick to it, it works really well. Of
Yeah.
course, that's the magic is that can you actually implement it? Can you actually apply it? Um, and yeah, so he has he's sort of the perfect tournament winning machine, the perfect World Othello Championship winning machine.
Yeah.
um, doing really exactly what it takes to win,
Yeah.
um, and sometimes being incredibly dominant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I've kind of observed that style in his play back then, and also even more recently online when he plays. He seems to have like a set of favorite openings that he often plays. So I think it's interesting, and I think I see this, more and more increasingly in some of the modern or up and coming players, in a sense that they try to keep it as consistent as possible. And I think it definitely shows in terms of consistency. Of course, maybe in terms of creativity, it's not as much as some of the talented players. But yeah, I think that's kind of like a trade-off. So kind of like as far as you know him, what is Mr. Hideshi Taminori's character like?
What is his character like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like
Oh,
what is his
making sure I understand the question.
personality? Yeah.
Oh, he's definitely nice. He's definitely friendly.
Mhm.
He seems very honest. Um, I didn't experience him as being incredibly talkative,
Yeah.
um, though he always has very interesting and good things to say when he does talk. Although it's also, our conversations have been in English, so that's a real disadvantage to him. Um, yeah, I've always enjoyed him, always respected him. There's never ever been anything to react negatively to,
Hmm.
um, which is quite amazing. I mean, to have that degree of consistency. Um, and I've never heard anything bad about him from anyone else, so that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Like I tend to be a little more okay with making mistakes, um, or uh, sometimes being a little more abrasive or something like that. Um,
Okay.
which is partly a cultural thing.
Yeah.
If I were
Yeah.
raised
Yeah.
if I were raised with Japanese culture, maybe I would be incredibly nice. But I'm American culture is a little bit different, as we've all
Yeah.
seen.
I
Um,
understand. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so like one thing, I mean, this isn't. I mean, I think this part of his character is that I think he's very disciplined. I think he may have relaxed. I have a feeling that he doesn't study as much as he used to.
Hmm.
Um, I think I get the feeling like he's coasting a bit more, like he's maybe resting on his laurels a bit and he's already achieved so much and maybe he feels pretty satisfied. I haven't sensed the same degree of drive that he had in 2005 and 2006.
Yeah.
Um, but from what I heard was that he would study every single game. And that was part of why he used to not play 1 minute games because, because you can play so many in a short period of time, but then to study them all is a real headache. So if you're kind of that disciplined that you're going to study every single game, then that's going to be a lot of work. I have a feeling that he probably relaxed about that. And I think he has more fun and maybe just studies occasionally. So Hideshi Tamenori, when he first started out, he was just to show like how disciplined he is and how studious he was. This was the era before computer programs um, were better than humans. By the time I started playing in 2000, computer programs were better than humans. So it was possible to just learn from an entity which was better than you at the
Yep.
game. But before like 1995 or so, uh, that did not exist. Maybe 93, 94, somewhere in there. So the humans had to figure out everything themselves. So
Right.
what Hideshi Tamenori would do, which is the same thing that Bobby Fischer would do with chess, was that Hideshi Tamenori would actually play against himself. This is what Brian Rose told me. Um, so he would play games against himself, and then he would keep journals of all these games. So he would just have, I guess he had hundreds of pages of these games and notes he would make about the games. So there was just an incredible level of dedication there,
Yeah.
um, and fascination with the game. And so I think that was a huge part of how he got as good as he did. By being a good enough human player, learning from other humans, but then by you know playing against himself as well as he could. Um, I think he learned a lot there. And I think that was a part of why his style was so good for tournaments. It was like, if he worked that hard at trying to outsmart himself, and he with that, and and if he couldn't really do it, then could anybody else?
Yeah.
Um,
Got it.
I tried doing that a few times. The games were always very weird. Well, this was a long time ago. Um, yeah, very weird games. And it threw me off. I had more fun playing against other people than playing against myself. Um,
Okay.
because you don't get to just be a winner. You're both a winner and a loser when you play yourself, right? So I think
Yeah.
that was a for me. Um, but so he was incredibly studious, um, and he was also laser focused on winning tournaments.
Yeah.
Comment he made to me a few years ago was that he wanted to qualify for the World Othello Championship one more time just to go and have fun,
Yeah.
because he said that he never actually had fun. He'd just been so focused on winning that he was just like, I guess, really stressed out the whole time. And of course, it succeeded. 7 out of 8 times, I think he won.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, that actually worked. But I can say that even when I've had results that were really disappointing, I always had a lot of fun at the World Othello Championships.
Yeah.
So that's not, maybe I needed to work even harder. Um,
But did he
but
say that, he was having difficulty qualifying in Japan?
yeah, so he has, that's of course the a bit of a tragedy there for all the great players in Japan, is that sometimes they don't qualify for
Yeah.
many years. They never qualify
Yeah.
to get to go to the World Championship.
So I was just wondering if you don't mind, I also wanted to ask you like both you and Taminori, even though Taminori hasn't played OTB that much, but I still see him very much active online in the mobile application that most top players use, which is Othello Quest these days. So I think both of you are, still often found in the top few rankings for 1 minute blitz games. And of course, also the slow 5 minute games. But what would you say is your win rate if you were to play 1 minute blitz games with him? What would be the ratio like?
I mean, you could just check our last 100 games, maybe that
Yeah.
with our website. I mean, my sense is that I win more than he does, but not by much. So maybe I would win like 55% or something in
Hmm.
classic normal Othello.
Okay.
Um, thinking XOT Othello. I mean, he doesn't practice that. If he practiced at it, he would be much better.
Right.
Um, but if it were an XOT, the last time we played XOT, which was a long time ago, I won uh, quite a clear majority of the XOT games. But I was also much more experienced with XOT and those sorts of positions and patterns that are more common in XOT. Um, but Teminari has been doing really well lately. Um,
Yeah.
one thing he does is that his opening set is he sticks to it so much. Um, so I think that's a little harder to beat, to somehow get him outside of his comfort zone is really difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but that's 1 minute games. I think he's a little, especially since I don't practice so long games. I wouldn't be surprised if he would win maybe even over half of the longer games.
Yeah.
Say for sure. Um, that was something that was pretty clear from the games we played in the past. We played a lot
Mhm.
of 3 minute games, especially in 2005 and 2006. Um, so I kind of contributed to my own demise, perhaps, by helping to train, helping to
Yeah.
train, boot camp train Hideshi Tamenori back into shape. That was from a competitive standpoint, that might have been a mistake on my part,
Yeah.
um, to give him all that training. But and that was amazingly 50-50 split. It was fascinating, and it was crazy how often the sessions would end up being 50-50. Where one or the other of us would be several games ahead, and then by the end it would be exactly 50-50.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Okay. Yeah. I think it's always interesting to kind of watch top players play against one another, and that always draws a crowd. So
yeah.
I'm just coming back to his world title record of 7, right? I was just wondering, do you think anyone will ever be able to beat his world title record? Of course, given the fact that Mr. Takanashi Yusuke is already on 5 world titles, but just
Yeah.
I think even when I spoke to Mr. Takanashi Yusuke recently, he mentioned that he's kind of taken a backseat given that the younger players are up and coming in the form of Keisuke Fukuchi and also Akihiro Takahashi, and there are many more promising I think young players in Japan who are actually practicing the game really hard. So do you think this record of 7 titles might be broken?
Well, I think Takanashi, just by being so close and just, I mean, he has an excellent record.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just when he's really on, he's really on, and he just makes so few mistakes. Especially, he's very good at avoiding big mistakes.
Yeah.
I think Takanashi is very good, in particular, at being able to play in a style where he makes only very small mistakes by and large,
Yeah.
um, and combining that with a very strong opening book, makes him almost impossible to defeat. Um, so I think if he just kind of were able to stick to his strengths,
Mhm.
and stay in his wheelhouse,
Yeah.
he could. I just think the odds are pretty good, actually, that he would get to 7. Um, I guess he get well, and maybe even get to 8. Um, and he just has so much tournament experience. I mean, that's such a huge advantage that the Japanese players have, is that they have so many more tournaments. I've always wondered, what would happen if I were to move to Japan, play in lots
Yeah.
of tournaments. How much could my tournament skill level improve?
Yeah.
Um, I just almost never have the incentive and the motive to do anything related to long games,
Yeah.
here in the USA.
Hmm.
Um, and But I think Takanashi could do it. I mean, and it's, of course, there's the question of, you know, can't, I mean, normally, children improve as they get older. So, and they, like, and I think normally around age 14 is when it happens that, there's a big pruning event in the brain that
Hmm.
kicks on,
Yeah.
where a lot of extraneous, um, relatively unimportant, um, neurons and brain connections get pruned away.
Yeah.
And the net effect of that is that people have more crystallized intelligence. So they appear to be smarter in most ways. They have less cognitive flexibility, um, and less of an ability to learn brand new skills the way that children have. Um, but they sort of have, more efficient brains. So almost every child, appears to be smarter. At least in certain ways, they are smarter, after that event occurs. And of course, both Takahashi and Fukuchi would hit that, and or if they haven't already hit that,
Yeah.
and then one would think that they might, um, be even more mentally capable. Um, so if they could reach whole other levels, and do that year after year after year. Of course, they've got a lot more time on their hands than Takanashi has. But
Yep.
of course, they also have more competition and um, than maybe Takanashi had. I mean, Takanashi, I think, benefited somewhat from the fact that he was winning a bunch of titles during a period when there just wasn't as much global activity,
Hmm.
where I think it was a little bit weaker there for a few years. Um, Still a big achievement, and maybe he would have won anyway, even if he'd had more competition. Maybe he would have just worked that much harder or something. Who knows? Um, and obviously he's won, a couple of titles that like when there's been about as tough as it gets. So
Yep.
um, and I mean, I would say that the titles I won in 2003 and four, that was just the players in general around the world were a bit weaker then. It was a more active period than the years before, and some of the years after, but it was the level of precision I had to play at back then was there was a little more forgiveness for mistakes then than there is now. Um, like Takanashi is clearly making fewer mistakes than I was
Yep.
making in 2003 and four. I mean,
Yeah.
some of that is also just stylistic, where uh, some of my style is built around making the game harder for the opponent. So
Hmm.
both of us are often making more mistakes.
Yep.
Where Takanashi, I think, is often just playing to make fewer mistakes himself, even if that also makes the game mostly easier for the opponent. He's fine with that. I mean, he can change that. If he needs to make the game harder because he thinks he's losing, he can do that, and he's very good at it.
Yep.
Um, but he and Masaya Kasai Ruru have more of that style of not being so focused on getting the opponent to make more mistakes. Um, I tend to like to make the game more challenging and hard, and I think it's more fun that way for both of us.
Yep.
And but and Makoto Suekuni is the same way. Um, and I think Hideshi Tamenori is maybe kind of in the middle. Maybe that's the place to be. That's the best place to be. Um, uh,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think.
so that's as far as styles are concerned. I mean, I think I may have gone way off track of whatever the original question was. The original
No.
question
No.
was okay, right. The original
Yeah.
question was, can
Yeah.
someone break that record?
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think it's still fine. It's still fine. It remains fairly relevant. I've always thought that I think talking about how anyone will be able to beat his record. I think talking about the difference in era is also relevant. I think I kind of told Takanashi Yusuke in a sense that sometimes I do think that even if he doesn't break the world title record of seven titles, it's fine because he's done it in an age whereby it's kind of like what I would call a bit more modernized Othello, or a period where people have increasingly relied on software analysis, and linking back to your point about uh only being able to win it if you made probably a fewer mistakes, because the competition these days are so stiff, and it's more unforgiving. So I would say that I wouldn't really rate his five world titles lower than Taminori's seven, even if he were never winning any more titles from here on out. But yeah, I do believe that he would still have it in him to at least win another one or two more. So yeah, let's see how that goes. But I think you've clearly highlighted that Othello is quite different during the early 2000s versus maybe something that you would see more of today. So I think that's a very interesting point, and also how we see Othello and humans who study Othello as evolved over time. I think that's always interesting to note. Do you think that do you think that it's gonna come to a point whereby we reach a point where everybody has studied the Othello openings, and you start seeing a lot more draws in at the future World Othello Championship because everybody just knows the book opening and refuse to deviate, perhaps?
um, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Well, I do want to say that I'm pretty sure that Tamanori's World Othello Championship record is more impressive than Takanashi's.
Okay.
Maybe not by a huge amount, but I think because it's over such a longer period of time,
Yeah.
um, and also because he usually had to qualify out of Japan, which was still very hard back in that era.
Yeah.
And he had, all of those do or die games and tournaments where he'd have to win um, in order to qualify, and he had an amazing record with that. And this was back when, at a time when there was only one tournament, and he had to win, and because the way they would do the Japanese teams, it wasn't the three best players from Japan or the four best players. It was um, just the one best player, and then there would be like a child representative, and then a female representative,
Hmm.
or be a female representative, and then like even a few times I think it was somebody from the Mega House Corporation or something like that, or the Sakuda Corporation would be on the team. Who wasn't necessarily such a great player.
Hmm.
There was something weird, something going on like that. So he had to be like, the best player out of Japan, win all these do or die games, and then go to the World Championship and win.
Yeah.
I do think that was an amazing achievement. I also do think it's fundamentally important that he was able to win all those world championships in an era before computer programs were better than humans,
Yeah.
and then go on and win another two or three world titles later on when the computer programs were better than humans. That he could win in both of those eras is, I think, very crucial. Um, and like a lot of the openings and stuff, like he just figured that stuff out on his own. Like really fantastic openings where he would just figure that out on his own, and it didn't seem like very many other people were figuring out many good openings on their own at all.
Yeah.
And he was figuring that out on his own, and I think that was really impressive. And So, and also I would say that, like the quality of his wins, like the level of play in all of his seven wins, pretty much, was, I think, clearly better than his opponents, and often to an amazing degree.
Yeah.
Like in 2005, he won all 13 games in the Swiss,
Right.
qualifying those, and then he was pretty. I mean, he actually lost some games on the third game, which is by that point shocking to me. But and then in 2006, he was amazingly solid. Um, so I just feel like the quality of the wins was also impressive. And Takanashi's wins were also very impressive as well, but I think the consistency was sometimes a little bit lower, perhaps. Um, and it was also over a shorter era of play. But I mean that counts. I mean we're talking about, I mean, in almost any sport or game, the
Yeah.
debate about is the best is often hinged on very small differences, and also probably some amount of luck.
Right.
Um, so I currently, am voting for Tamenori having the best World Othello Championship record, but it is not a huge difference, perhaps.
Yeah.
It seems clear, but also not huge. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And given that Mr. Hideshi Tamenori is also, active, still active on Othello Quest even today, playing
Yeah.
under the nickname Tommy2016, I believe. And he's
Yeah.
still doing very, very well online, and it's very, very difficult to kind of push him out of his comfort and consistent opening set and his comfort zone. Yeah, so I think, yeah, for sure it will be challenging to kind of beat his record as a whole. And yeah, I think I've met him once at the Othello World Cup 2013 when it was a
Mhm.
special event held in Japan. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
he did exude that vibe of, a very, very strong and disciplined individual. So I think it's always interesting to try to learn from these top players, including Taminori, Takanashi, and also yourself. Yeah. So I think that was all the questions that I kind of wanted to ask you about Taminori. So uh, would you have any further points that you wanted to kind of bring up, perhaps?
Um, I mean, we've done very little to discuss his style of play.
Yeah.
Um, so one, for example, the French. I think it was like Mark Teste and maybe Stefan Nicolay. They did a study calculating the average move at which a player would play their first X square. And Hideshi Tamenori had the latest average X square of any human player in the Thor database. So he had a style which was definitely more focused on um, not sacrificing corners, but rather getting his opponent to sacrifice corners to him. Um, so he's normally tended to take more edges and to
to kind of
not
force.
he's not as focused on like getting lots of wedges, where you sacrifice the corner to your opponent
Yep.
and then you get a wedge and then you use that to get this and stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, and just based on the results, it looks to me like that is harder for opponents to play against. Um, he also has clearly been more dominant with playing as white than as black.
Okay.
Um, so like which is the tournament record shows that he has a much higher win rate with white than as black. And so that was something that would come up, I think, with all these all Japan championships that he would win in order to qualify to the World Championship, where he would um, he would choose white for the finals, where it would just be one game, and he would get that choice. And so he would choose white, and then he would have to win. Like he couldn't draw it. Like if it was a draw, then his opponent would win or
Yep.
get the qualifying spot.
Yep.
Um, and so, but he would just win, like it's like almost every single time, like 7 out of 8 times or something like that.
Yeah.
He was just so dominant on white, um, and it shows up a lot in our games as well. That the white player usually has the advantage. Um, and it's to a significant degree. Um, um, it was sort of partly from having to learn how to beat Tamanori on white, or trying to learn how to do that, that I got better at different sorts of like black swindles and that sort of thing. So I think I'm better on those because
Okay.
of Tamanori's influence.
Yeah,
Um,
I think one interesting point that I kind of noticed in Taminori's game and some of his losses, like specifically the one in 2006 against Makoto, I think was it during the Swiss pairing or perhaps during the finals. I think it's that he tends to also emphasize diagonal control and sometimes he
yeah,
misses rare swindles perhaps. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to like classic parody, he's maybe the best there's ever been in classical diagonal control.
Yeah.
Um, where I've I think focused a bit more on the more rare swindles, and so have players like Makoto Suekuni. Um, he also normally, and this has been obvious all throughout his career, has had more of a strategy of generally taking more discs than a lot of the other top players. Like Takanashi tends to have a much quieter style of play where he usually has fewer discs and is usually flipping fewer discs on his moves. Um, until the end game when he gets them all back.
Yeah.
Um, the Tamanori, um, I sometimes have thought of it as like his style almost looks like him personally, like his physical body. Like he has a very solid, compact body.
Hmm.
He looks really solid. He's not very tall, but he's looks like he's like really strong, probably. Um, like if they had sumo wrestling with really small weight divisions, like he would maybe be good at that. And or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It's just
Okay.
popped
Yeah.
into my. Um, and so his discs are normally more solid, more compact. He usually has more of them. Partly by having more edges, he tends to have more discs. Um, and his edge play is phenomenal. Like is really really good at choosing edges. I think, um, especially more anyway. I mean, sometimes he's had periods where he's maybe been had too much of a bias towards taking edges, and that would hurt him. I think in the 2013 World Cup, it was like that. Um,
Yep.
sometimes I think I managed to maybe abuse that a bit. Um, but So I think in terms of style, it's like he's got a very clear style.
Yeah.
Um, which and it's kind of interesting that he could have such a clear and almost predictable style, and yet it seems like people don't really manage to emulate it that well
Right.
or play
Yeah.
it that like if it's like like exactly what the boxer is going to do, and yet you can't do anything about it. And they
Yeah.
just do it. There's no way to fight back against it. I did feel like, and actually, this as far as sumo wrestling as a metaphor is concerned, I was more clear about this fact that his style is a style which is very hard for humans to play against, but
Hmm.
he was so good at it that he would almost always achieve that style. And so I very much felt like like someone play a sumo wrestler who's consistently getting pushed out of the center of the ring. Like he would just dominate literally often the center of the board. Um, and then I would be trying to be resourceful against that, but it just seemed like he was asserting his style much better than I was asserting my style. Um, and anytime I would like really manage to force him off of his style, that probably meant making some crucial mistake, and I would lose anyway.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know, I
I think
did
I feel the same way as well when I play him. Yeah.
so. I mean, I clearly managed to win 50%, occasionally more, sometimes less. Um, but it was often by having to be very resourceful and doing some really weird thing that I normally would not have to do against an opponent.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was a very interesting experience. I don't offhand I can't think of another player who was as good at you know getting to play their style as frequently as he did, and just sort of forcing that adaptation.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed. Yeah.
and He also had just excellent decision making. He had excellent instincts. He had normally excellent time management. My time management was quite consistently worse than his was. I think my time management is better now, but my time management used to be clearly worse than his was. Um, he also was very good at calculation, very, very good at calculating. And that was a part of his skill was that he would calculate, calculate, calculate. And more than any other player I've ever played against, my experience was that he could play a move. I would know that it's a mistake, but I would not know how to punish him for that mistake. I would not know how to actually beat it, um, because he had done such a good job calculating that when I would calculate myself, even though I would feel quite confident that there was a way to punish that move, I just couldn't see it. Like what is
Okay. Okay.
how do we what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And also like perhaps it could be deceptively a mistake, but maybe he has already figured out that would work out for him perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, and there's also just something, sometimes it's a bit of almost like a gambling thing, like a playing the odds thing, where if it's unlikely that the opponent will choose the correct move, and all of the other moves are losing, then maybe you make that gamble.
Yeah.
Um, and it was also fantastic with diagonal control,
Hmm.
and it was partly from playing against him that and just how quickly he would play certain diagonal control moves in blitz games or long games, um, where it was obvious that he had calculated out that the opponent would not be able to cut the diagonal, and access the diagonal.
Yeah.
That really inspired me to get better on the diagonal control stuff. Um, I figured if he could do it, maybe I can do it too, but I've got to
Yeah.
work on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So I think his strength is diagonal control, and potentially the flip side of it could be also a weakness, which is kind of like a swindle. So if you can try
mhm.
to work it in your favor, you could perhaps execute a swindle against him maybe.
Yeah, yeah. He also, I thought, was very good at being able to win while not like if he's playing as black, like he would often win without getting parity.
Yeah.
I was often focused on like, defeating parity, like getting parity myself or getting a swindle, where he was very good at just like, well, I'm not going to get parity, I'm not going to get a swindle, but you're going to have to give me so many discs that I'm going to win anyway. So he was
Yeah.
very good.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
just getting to take so many edges and flip so many pieces that he would win anyway. And I thought that was very impressive. Um, and I mean, just as far as speaking about the old-fashioned players or the old timers, Masaki Takazawa was the guy who was amazingly good at playing black and who really mastered a lot of swindles and ways of winning as black. And so he had an impressively good winning percentage on black. Um, and Brian Rose's comment to me was that Masaki Takizawa was like the first really modern player, really reaching that world class modern level, and that he did a really fantastic job of teaching other people. So
Yeah.
probably C. Tamanori and others learned a lot from Takizawa, um, and that makes sense to me just from looking at Takizawa's old games. Um, and I mean, in general, if you want to speak of, interviewing me about Tamanori makes some sense and that kind of thing. But I think if you interviewed Brian Rose and talked about a lot of the Japanese history. He would be an amazing person to interview because he knows so much from personal experience and from actually being able to read and understand and speak Japanese.
Yeah.
Um, so he has a vast wealth of stories and knowledge about the classic Japanese Othello history.
Yeah. He
Um,
might also be the best person to also kind of be a, a co-interviewer for Japanese players, perhaps.
yes, yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, very impressive. Um,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess that's kind of probably all the time we had today for Mr. Hideshi Tamenori. So, I think yeah, definitely he's gonna go down history as the greatest, or if not one of the greatest players who ever played Othello for sure. So yeah,
yeah,
I think yeah. So I definitely appreciate your time. Taking the time to go through this interview and just give some insights since you also played him firsthand. So thank you very much for participating in this interview.
yeah, it was fun. It was my pleasure. It was fun talking about people I like and admire so much. A lot more fun than talking about anyone else. So,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Ben, and goodbye.